On Sunday, December 13 at 3 p.m., violinist Kristin Lee, cellist Paul Watkins, and pianist Gilles Vonsattel will join forces at Parlance Chamber Concerts, performing three of the highlights of Beethoven's chamber repertoire: the Fourth Cello Sonata, the Ghost Trio, and the Kreutzer Sonata. At the beginning of 1803, Beethoven announced to his friends that he was considering leaving the overly conservative city of Vienna and moving to Paris, which he felt was more politically and artistically adventurous. Perhaps as a way of musically paving his road to Paris, he considered composing and dedicating a new sonata to Rudolphe Kreutzer, a leading French violin virtuoso of the day. Beethoven had met the renowned soloist several seasons before in Vienna and had been impressed both by his remarkable playing and by his ingratiating French manners. Ultimately, Beethoven did dedicate his Ninth Violin Sonata to Monsieur Kreutzer, but the path to that dedication was circuitous to say the least. The work known today as the Kreutzer Sonata by all rights should be known as the Bridgetower. The violinist who inspired the work and with whom Beethoven performed its successful premiere was the 24-year-old Afro-European violin virtuoso George Polgreen Bridgetower. Born to a West Indian father and a Polish mother, Bridgetower grew up on the lavish Hungarian estate of Prince Nicholas Esterházy, the patron of Franz Joseph Haydn. His father, John Frederick Bridgetower, was a servant of Prince Nicholas, although he claimed to be an African prince himself. George Bridgetower exhibited prodigious musical talent from an early age and was undoubtedly influenced by Haydn and the illustrious members of the Esterházy court orchestra. A precocious student, he quickly became a fluent violinist, an accomplished composer, and the speaker of at least 5 languages. While George was still a boy, his father John, clad flamboyantly in Turkish-style robes, took him on concert tours of Europe, where the young prodigy performed in the courts of the great capitals, including Paris and London, where he was billed as the son of an African prince. His playing particularly impressed the Prince of Wales, later to become George IV, who oversaw the young prodigy's continuing musical education. The young musician remained in England, where he studied violin and composition with the masters of the day, including a former student of Mozart, the composer, organist Thomas Atwood. Ultimately, George Bridgetower was employed in the prince's own orchestra, with which he also performed as a soloist in all of the major theaters of London and Paris. In 1802, at the age of 24, Bridgetower was given leave to visit his mother and brother in Dresden, where he also gave very successful concerts. The following year he came to Vienna, where he met Prince Karl Lichnowsky, one of the most important musical patrons of the day. It was Lichnowsky who introduced George Polgreen Bridgetower to the 33-year-old Beethoven. Bridgetower was evidently a man of enormous personal charisma, energy, and charm. His talent and exotic presence appealed greatly to Beethoven, and within a short time they developed a close camaraderie. When Bridgetower suggested that they perform a concert together and premiere a new sonata to be composed especially for the occasion by Beethoven himself, the older composer was only too happy to oblige. Beethoven asked his friend, the violinist impresario Ignaz Schuppanzig, to arrange a lavish public event to be held in late March 1803 at the illustrious Augarten Pavilion in Vienna. As time was short, Beethoven appropriated the concluding presto from another sonata in A major that he had composed the year before, and then set to work feverishly on the first 2 movements. On the day of the concert at 4 in the morning, Beethoven summoned his student Ferdinand Ries to his apartment to copy out the remaining portion of the violin part for the first movement. At this point, the second movement only existed as an incomplete piano score, which Beethoven intended to fill out from memory during the concert itself. By 8 a.m., a glittering audience of aristocrats was assembled at the Augarten Pavilion for the eagerly anticipated event. The audience included the British ambassador and three of Beethoven's most esteemed patrons, Princes Lichnowsky, Lobkowitz, and Archduke Rudolph. Years later, George Bridgetower recalled the day and described how, during their hurried early morning run-through, he had responded to Beethoven's cadenza-like piano arpeggio in the 35th measure with his own boldly improvised violin arpeggio. It was a nervy thing to attempt with the notoriously prickly Beethoven, but rather than becoming angry, Beethoven leaped up from the piano, ran over, embraced Bridgetower, and cried, "Once again, dear boy." And when it came to the performance that morning, Beethoven simply held the C major chord and let Bridgetower improvise his own little cadenza. The ink on the incomplete manuscript of the second movement was barely dry when the concert began. Bridgetower had to look over Beethoven's shoulder to sight-read the florid variations from the hastily written piano score. Even so, their performance made a powerful impression. In recalling their premiere performance of the second movement, he said, Beethoven's expression in the Andante was so chaste that it was unanimously hailed and had to be repeated twice. The scintillating Tarantella finale he had composed the previous season brought the house down. The premiere was a resounding success. Beethoven was so delighted at the reception of the work that at the celebration afterwards he gave the piece a teasingly affectionate title of questionable taste. He called it a sonata per un mulatico lunatico, sonata for a crazy mulatto. Beethoven wrote that the piece was written in a highly concertante style, almost in the manner of a concerto. With this work, Beethoven elevated the formerly intimate salon genre of violin and piano sonatas to the level of a large-scale public concert piece playable only by virtuosi of the highest order. Some years later, Hector Berlioz described the piece as one of the most sublime of all violin sonatas. Sadly, Beethoven's and Bridgetower's friendship did not survive for long. Shortly after the concert, Bridgetower made a disparaging remark about a lady Beethoven knew, which caused him to fly into a rage. He withdrew the dedication to Bridgetower and immediately broke off their relationship. Bridgetower later characterized their rift as a silly quarrel over a girl, but he and Beethoven never met again. And so, as originally intended, the dedication ultimately went to the famous French professor at the Paris Conservatory, of whom Beethoven said, "This Kreutzer is a dear, kind fellow, who during his stay in Vienna gave me a great deal of pleasure." Then, in a backhanded swipe at Bridgetower's character, he added, "I prefer Kreutzer's modesty and natural behavior to all the exterior without any interior, which is characteristic of most virtuosi." Ironically, Beethoven did not know that Kreutzer himself had no use for his music, and apparently never performed the work that made his name immortal. Kreutzer later told Berlioz that he found the sonata to be outrageously unintelligible. You can hear Beethoven's beloved Kreutzer Sonata of 1803, along with his fourth cello sonata and the Ghost Trio, performed by Kristin Lee, Paul Watkins, and Gilles Vonsattel at 3 p.m. on Sunday, December 13, in the acoustically superb sanctuary of West Side Presbyterian Church in Ridgewood, New Jersey. For full program and ticket information, please call 800-838-3006 or visit parlancechamberconcerts.org.